what got you into sport from the beginning?
Yeah. So my family, especially my dad played college football at Towson University, and he was always into sports, and I think that was something that like I learned right away. He actually coached then after that at my high school, and then he ended up doing he was working as a wide receivers coach at a local like our local college. It was like a small Division 1 private school. So sports have kind of always been in my life, and I was introduced to them really at an early age. And my dad had us. I have two younger siblings, two younger sisters. So we were trying everything. Like I remember, doing AYSO soccer, and we played baseball. We did karate. So I was entered, yeah, I ended up getting my black belt. So like we were in all the things. And yeah, it was just like a part of my life really early on. And then obviously as like I got older, I started finding sports that I really enjoyed. So then it ended up being I loved running, I loved playing basketball. I played a little bit of soccer too, and that's something that I ended up, again, pursuing through high school. And yeah, it was just always kind of just been there. And I like watching sports, so that was another piece. It's just like yeah, it's kind of just like a built-in part of our lives growing up. So,
I think that when I talk to athletes who are in sports from a super young age, we're talking like elementary school,
yeah.
versus those who find their sport later in life, they have a much different relationship with their identity as an athlete.
Hmm.
What about growing up and playing sports and being on teams with your sisters
Yeah.
changed your relationship with sports?
Yeah, yeah. I I feel like for me, it was more so like the life skills that we learned through it. And I don't know that I realized that at the time, obviously being younger, but like there were so many things I was learning in addition to like how to be an athlete, right? So it was like well, number one, I just had a lot of fun playing sports. And that was something obviously for anyone, right? If you're doing something that's enjoyable and fun, you want to keep doing it. So then you identify more with it because it is a lot of fun. And then I think, again, going back to that piece of the life skills, it's like, I think at a young age, you just start to like pick up on things like how to communicate better with people and, how to work as a team, how to handle adversity. And that's something I will say too, like now, like I guess looking back at, my time in sports and what I do now as a mental performance coach, it's like I think there are a lot of life skills. Like we talk about this idea of sport, and being a mental coach, you're trying to enhance performance, of course. But at the same time, these are life skills that then you're carrying with you and applying in other areas as well. So I think that was just kind of like you just start to learn a lot more. And yeah, it paired with it being fun. I think it was just yeah, that's kind of how I view that. So
I I saw your kind of experience with
yeah.
youth sport. I don't have a ton of sports psychologists that specialize in youth sport on this podcast because it is geared toward like more elite performance, but
Yeah.
I think that it absolutely bears questioning. How
Hmm.
do you introduce youth athletes to mental performance skills?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I primarily do work with youth. So, I mean, I have like, yeah, high school is pretty much my main age range. So I'm usually like, we'll say like, well, middle school too, like 13, 14 through 18. And then I do have some college athletes. But I will say I work with some kids, like families reach out to me with kids 12 and under. And we're starting that process pretty young. How I like to introduce it is I think sometimes I think we've gotten better with the stigma around like the mental side of sport and I think it's improved quite a bit, but I think there is still that like for younger people, it's kind of looked at as at times like a weakness or something like they don't necessarily want to talk about because they feel like it could be like a problem. So I like to introduce it, especially at a young age, and I think I gear it more towards the families as a whole because I think that's also something to consider when you're working with youth. I'd like to really make sure the parents are engaged. It's like understanding that just what I've talked about before in terms of my experience. I think it's a really good foundation for making your sport experience and performance better. But even more so for kids, it's like let's start planting the seeds early so that they can start developing these skills like that can be used in life. And again, that they're prepared as they do continue to move up or compete in their sports and get older. It's like we have built a base for things like confidence, and managing emotions and handling your focus or being able to focus on the right thing. So I like to introduce it as, yeah, it's big picture. These are really important attributes for sport performance. But what's really important, I think, is building the base for life skills that will carry you way beyond sport. That's kind of how I like to look at it. And that's kind of from my positive youth development background. That's kind of what I carried with me from school.
When you have these complex topics, how do you how do you like completely bare bones teach a middle schooler about something like determination or confidence or
Yeah.
drive?
Yes, that's such a good question. And I will say I'm not an expert. That's something I'm working on every day. Like that's something that I think is I'm still learning a lot, especially when I'm working with younger kids, because you really do have to do that. You have to just like make it as practical as possible. Like you can't, and that's something I don't even like doing that with like the high school and college athletes I work with, where it's like I don't want to sound like a textbook. When I'm talking to kids, they're like, yeah, that background and that education, of course, is so important. I think you need that, like research to practice approach. But I think it is a skill in itself to be able to deliver that research to practice approach in a practical way, right? So I think it's like being able to meet kids where they're at, and introduce these topics or these attributes in their simplest form, right? And I think how I do that, or I try to do that right now, is with, making it super engaging and interactive. That's something I find working with kids is like it's so important. And I do a lot of my work on Zoom, especially post COVID. It's just I found that, and for families too, it's just way more convenient. Where I do in-person work as well, but there's a lot of kids that I meet with on Zoom, so it's always trying to be creative with, okay, like if I'm going to talk about confidence, can I find a video of an athlete like Kobe Bryant who's discussing it, who they can relate to? Or if I'm trying to define it, okay, this is the definition from the textbook, but how can I kind of break that down and make it manageable for a kid who's 14 years old to understand? So, like, for example, with confidence, right, I usually talk about it as, hey, confidence is something you do, right? Yes, it's that feeling of knowing you can do something well, but it's something you do. So let's talk about actions that create confidence for you. So just trying to really break things down into their simplest forms, but it's definitely challenging, I would say.
What do you think the main difference is in pitching those topics to youth sport athletes versus collegiate athletes?
I think, honestly, I think it's more like about the experience. I think sometimes, like when we're talking about things like confidence or managing emotions, it's at times more difficult for younger kids or like that youth age to comprehend or really understand because maybe they don't have as many like life or sport experiences with it. Whereas like if I'm working with a college athlete, it's like, okay, like I could probably tell you, or a college athlete can tell me about a time when something happened that rattled their confidence. So I think it's just trying to like familiarize youth with obviously what these things are, but also then getting them to think about it and actually understand how it's affecting them in their sport. I don't know that youth always come in with that understanding of like, okay, like I think we generally have an idea of, okay, yeah, confidence is important or it's important to focus. Like we're told that a lot, but I don't know how often then they're being taught how to recognize it and how they experience it. So I think it's a lot of that too. Just like there's just a little bit less like experience with younger kids. So
How far into speaking with a youth athlete can you determine that they're good at articulating that process?
it varies, to be honest. Like I think that's hard to say. Like I wouldn't say you can like pinpoint. Because it's interesting. It's like you could get kids who are really well versed and understand, like they're really reflective, and self-aware, whereas like others same age, like just lack complete self-awareness. So I think it's for me kind of figuring that out in the initial session. Like it's not something I always spend time with. Like before I would ever like work with an athlete in like regular sessions or we do some type of package together, I'm always telling the families and the athlete like we'll start with an initial so that we can obviously get to know each other better and then work through your assessment and then gives me an idea of like, okay, where are they at, like where are they coming in, what's the foundation, And then from there, I say like, hey, if this is a good fit, like, or we both agree on it, then we can keep going. But I think in the initial session, you do learn a lot about people, in terms of like just even open-ended questions that I will ask. It's like you get a pretty good idea if you ask them like, hey, when's the time when your thoughts didn't help you on the field? And if it's like pulling teeth or it's like really hard for them to kind of like reflect on something, then it's to me, it's like, okay, we probably have to start right at like that before we get into any skills or start really trying to apply these things. You have to build the awareness around like how they're experiencing it, when they experience it, what is it like for them. So that's something I like to do in like an initial call.
How did you end up specializing in youth sport?
Yeah, that was my PhD actually. So I went to Michigan State and I was in the Institute for the Study of Youth Sports, actually. So that was my background, and that's what, went there for 4 years. And, I focused on youth sports, but actually my main concentration was youth sport parenting, actually. That's what I did my dissertation in. And that was something I was always interested in, just like the family dynamics. And I found like more on the applied side now. So I'm not doing research or working in the university setting at this point. So I'm doing everything's just applied. I found it's so important. So it's something like, especially when you're working with kids, it's having everyone or understanding the dynamics and knowing that it's like we can't isolate a kid, right? Like, and that was something that was really important. It's like a lot of research tends to do that. We tend to look at the athlete alone and like, okay, how does a lack of confidence affect their performance or their inability to self-regulate affect performance? But then we're not really understanding like they're not functioning in a bubble, right? So like to really understand a kid's sport experience and how we can best support them, we have to kind of like broaden our scope. That's my opinion. To really understand like, okay, well, what role do parents play in this? That was something I was interested in. And yeah, I know some of my colleagues are really interested in siblings, right? The dynamics there. So, anyways, that was just like what my training was in. And that was something that I pursued through those 4 years that I was at Michigan State.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we kind of juxtapose the support systems of college athletes, pro athletes,
Yeah.
and youth sport athletes, how do
Mhm.
you see the impact of those support systems differing?
Yeah. Okay. So differences between college and elite versus your youth. I think
Right.
just going even off of research, I think it's up to 12 year through 12 years old or up to 12 years old, like kids' main sources of information are their parents, right? So I think, and then after 12, it starts to shift where we care like high school age around that middle school, high school age, you start to care more about what other people think. So then we start to look to our peers for information and then coaches. And I'd say that would continue on through college and like professional too. So I think the main difference is parents are a lot more involved and I think held to this like standard of like we look to them more as kids, like what does mom and dad think? Or what goals do mom and dad have for me? And if mom and dad say these are the goals, then I'm going to be more likely to say those are my goals and want to pursue that stuff. Whereas I think obviously with development, you gain more of like a sense of independence, and then when you're in college and more elite professional, it's like mom and dad aren't really as involved, right? So it's like okay, we have this independence, and we're looking to those significant others like coaches and even ourselves. I think like obviously like I think at that level, it's like you don't get to that level without putting in some type of work. I would say I argue both mentally and physically in all areas. So I think they generally have a better understanding of what they need and how they can function. Whereas I think youth are tending to go towards, looking to others first.
When do you see that start to change in a youth athlete?
Yeah, like the shift in who they go to
The
for
shift, I guess,
perfection.
in self-efficacy.
Um,
I mean, I know that differs. I know that's a loaded
yeah.
question, but like, is there a time period where you see these youth athletes getting enough self-confidence
hmm
to create decision making for themselves?
Yeah, great question. I think, yeah, I know that I think again, I hate saying it varies, but I think it's also a function of like what they're putting into this training. So if I'm going to just speak specifically to like work I do with athletes through the mental performance lens, it's like the ones that I find who are able to take a session and really treat it similarly to their physical training, and work on this stuff away from our sessions or our calls, and they're intentional and they create those habits. To me, that's what makes it like that creates effectiveness, number one, more effectiveness. And then number two, I think that like anything, like any physical skill you do, that builds your mental skill as well. So to me, it's about like, okay, how are they looking at this and treating it? If it's just kind of like a one-off where, yeah, I meet for the session, or, I'm not doing anything at all. Maybe there's a lot of athletes that don't do anything to train their mindset. Then yeah, it's going to be a little bit more or a lot more difficult to, create or build that self-efficacy. Whereas if we're training it and treating it similarly to our physical training, I think you do start to see more positive effects. And again, that'll vary based on, I think, yeah, the work that they're putting into it.
What got you interested in the youth sports side of sports psychology?
Yeah. I think for me, it was based on personal experience. So, like I said, I was a multi-sport athlete growing up. Sport was introduced to me at a very young age. When I got to high school, I wanted to pursue running. So, like, that was something I was like, okay, by the time I hit like my sophomore year, I thought, okay, I want to do this in college. I want to get to the next level. So I was doing everything you could do physically to make that happen, but my results just weren't showing, or I felt like the results that I was getting was not reflective of the work that I was putting in. And I struggled with this, and I would talk to people about it. And I was always told, okay, you just got to keep training, like keep working, like keep going to your private coach, keep going to your forms coach, and working out in the gym. So hindsight being 2020, I didn't end up, well, first, I didn't end up going to college to run. I struggled a lot. I ended up quitting cross country because, again, at the time I didn't know it, but I was mentally struggling. But I didn't know. So I went to college and took a sports psych class, and I kind of just, it was eye-opening for me. I realized, whoa, like all the things that I struggled with were not physical, it was all mental. I just didn't have anyone to talk to about it, and no one told me that. So I graduated high school in 2011. It really wasn't, maybe it was getting started, but it really wasn't a thing where we were talking about like, oh, you can train your mind like you train, your physical performance. So, my interest in youth sports really centered on, my own life experience, going through it. So, I was like, man, had I had someone to talk to, I don't know that it would have changed my trajectory or, what happened, but man, I probably would have enjoyed it more. Maybe I wouldn't have quit, and that was kind of a sad thing, right? Because that was like a big part of my life, but I couldn't handle it and I was miserable. So, yeah, I look at it as I got into the youth area because I wanted to be able to give back to kids who may be going through similar mental blocks I did. And knowing that it's like, hey, you don't have to feel like you're flailing out there. Like this is a thing and it's important. It's just as important as any other type of training you're doing. So yeah, just being able to kind of help out in that area. That's kind of why I got into the youth sport range or area.
Yeah. Can you list some inherent ways that youth athletes now deal with those stressors differently than like you and I would have when we were playing youth sports?
Yeah. So again, I think it's more so we're just talking about it more and normalizing it more as a part of performance. Like today, we're seeing it's like a part of holistic development, athlete development. I think we still have a lot of work to do in a good way, but I think it's more discussed as I think compared to like when probably you and I were in sports, we're looking at this stuff now more as an enhancer rather than like a weakness. So it's an enhancer and a separator. And I think that even just alone opens doors to being more likely to want to try and use these things and learn about them, learn about mental performance and these attributes. And I really do. I think that's how it's different. We're not looking at it as, like I said before, it's not a bad thing. It's an important piece that if you really do, and again, I know this obviously varies people's motivations for playing sports, but for those who do want to continue playing and like how I was in high school and wanted to go pursue it at the next level, I think you have to decide to work on these things. Like, I don't think it's a choice. Like, I really do. I think it has to be a piece of your, in some way, it has to be a piece of your, training.
How do you grow as a youth athlete and not align your entire identity with that pursuit?
Oh, I know. It's hard. I don't know. Ask that question all the time now because of like what we're calling now or what we're seeing is like the professionalization of youth sports. I have no idea how it's so difficult, I think, for athletes to function in this sport environment today, youth, because of that, where it's like that college and professionalized nature of sport is totally trickling down into youth sports. And that's scary to me because I think we're seeing a lot more kids like not enjoy it, drop out at earlier ages. I think, and this has been a stat, but it's I think around like 12 or 13. That's when we're seeing a huge dip in sport participation, which is concerning. It's not just about the sport. It's concerning just like generally because we're losing physical activity and kids aren't staying engaged, and there are really good life skills you can gain from sports. So, anyways, I think it's so difficult. And I think there's also a lot of external pressure on kids today. Like I can tell you the kids that I work with, the themes do not, I mean, they don't change much. Like kids are coming in and there's huge concerns with like fear of failure, perfectionism, lack of confidence, I think. And I don't think I think those things are related because there's a lot of pressure to be the best at everything. And then it's kind of even from a family dynamic perspective, there's a lot of people who have this perspective or perception that it's like the keeping up with the Joneses mentality where, my kid has to be doing everything, or the person next to me has a private coach. And, in order to go play D1 sports or whatever we're doing, we have to do it all too, and we have to keep up. And I think there's a lot of pressure there. Like I've had tennis players, for example, who they'll talk to me about like the expectations that they feel like they have to meet for their families because, hey, mom and dad are putting a lot of money into my sport experience, and I feel like I'm letting them down if I don't figure it out or I don't perform up to a standard. So, anyways, that's just an example, but yeah, I think there's a ton of pressure on kids today because of that. And I do think it's difficult to be able to navigate that, especially if you're not really, you don't have have support of like a mental performance coach or someone you can work with or talk to.
What do you think from a youth sport maturity perspective, kind of moving through life, is the most important mental skill
Hmm.
to perfect as a
Yeah,
youth athlete that will
yeah.
theoretically predict success later on?
I think I would say confidence because, and I'll tell you why, because I think most people tend to get their confidence from external things. And I'd say that's across the board from youth all the way through high school and beyond. Okay. I think external things like winning and getting results and pleasing others. And, we get confidence when someone recognizes us, which is not a bad thing, I will say too. I'm like, you will get confidence from those things. But where it becomes a problem, and this is what I see with a lot of youth I work with, is if those are the only places you get your confidence, we're going to have issues. Because then I always say, it's like, well, what if those things aren't happening? And those things very likely will not always happen, right? We're not always going to win. We're not always going to get, accolades, or we're not going to get told we're the best all the time. So if we're not getting those things, where are we getting our confidence? And I think kids really struggle with that because if they're lacking confidence, then a lot of times I think that feeds into more negative thinking. I think that I think it can kind of relate to that idea of fear of failure. So then it's like, hey, if my confidence is based on, results, then I don't want to mess up ever. So then I go in and I'm afraid to mess up. So then I don't play my game. So I think there's a lot of connections there that kind of stem from, hey, we need to be able to help kids create confidence for themselves, like that idea that it comes from within and understand how to do it. Because again, it's like we tell you to be confident, coaches, I'll tell kids to be confident, family members will, but then how often do you really actually teach them what that looks like or how to implement it? So I think confidence is really important.
Kind of stemming off of that, how do you set the groundwork for a student athlete's positive self-talk?
Ooh, yeah. I just did a talk on this yesterday. I'm working with a high school rowing team, and it was a group talk, but we were talking about the idea that your self-talk and your mindset is the foundation of everything we do mentally. And it sounds really, I always say this because I think it sounds so like simple and obvious in conversation. You're like, hey, your self-talk, right? What you think and what you say matters. Everybody can agree to that, I think. But then again, when you're in an environment like a sport environment that just inherently has like pressure and things you can't control and lots going on in the environment that's stressful, how often do we actually then take control of the self-talk, right? Because again, if you haven't trained it, it's going to be, I would argue it's going to be very unlikely that you're going to be able to gain control of it in a situation where you really need it. So I use self-talk as the foundation of everything with this mental training. And I think about it and I teach it like your thoughts impact how you feel, impacts how you perform, right? So this idea, and I don't mean like I'll tell them, I'm like, I don't, it can be like your emotions, like you're frustrated or you're happy or sad, but I'm saying feelings more like, hey, the way you think will impact your confidence levels, will impact what you choose to focus on, will impact how anxious or not you are. Those things are going to interact and they are going to show up in the performance. So it's kind of building that awareness of, hey, here's the process and this is why it's important. And now we have to talk about like, okay, how do we get your thoughts to help you rather than hurt you? And you have to understand that it will take practice. So like if you're going to say like, hey, I'll just tell myself I can do it. And it doesn't really mean anything to you and you just kind of like, yeah, I'll talk to myself in the right way. It's not going to be helpful, right? Or it'll be inconsistent. I shouldn't say it won't be helpful. I just think it'll lead to inconsistencies in performance. So,
I saw that you were working with IMG Academy.
mhm,
Incredible, first of all. Second of all, how do you see that those athletes have a grasp on mental performance
mhm,
in a way that other, I'm going to say, like more amateur youth athletes don't?
mhm. Yeah, I think it's for IMG Academy athletes, it's more it's like ingrained in their systems, right? Like they go to school there, and that is something that's introduced at a really early age. And I think that's just something that they learn is important right from the start. Like that's something that, and that's a part of their days. Like that's a part of the routine. Like we're not just, obviously there's the physical training, they're going to school, but the mental training, there's time set aside for that. And I think it's maybe this is just a really, I don't know, just maybe seems obvious, but like it's emphasized, right? And it's talked about. So they're being exposed to it, I think maybe more so or more often than maybe what we call like your amateur athlete or, someone who's maybe not in that environment, right? So like, because IMG, they do emphasize the whole athlete, right? Like it's about the sport performance, but they're doing things for mental. They're focusing on nutrition and fueling, their strength and conditioning. So I just think these kids have more of just the foundations of like all the pieces of the puzzle that are important for being a great athlete and also a great person.
How do you reinforce that it's okay to understand those skills,
Hmm.
but not be functioning at 100% all the time?
Yeah. Oh, I think that's just something you have to normalize as I don't even think it's possible to function at 100% all the time. That's something I share with my athletes all the time. It's like you're very likely not going to be, I use like a stoplight analogy. It's like green, yellow, red, right? Most athletes to me are spending their time in the yellow zone. Like I'd argue like 80% of the time we're going to be in yellow. We're not spending a ton of time in green at like that 90, 100% range, right? And that's okay. I think it's normalizing that like you're not always going to have 100% effort. You can give 100%, or I don't want to say 100%. You can give your best effort, but knowing that like sometimes that's not going, sometimes the best that day is like 50%, right? And to me, my big thing I push with athletes in that area when we're thinking about being at like an effort level is if you're at 50% that day, I'm okay with it as long as you find a way to max out the 50%. right? But if you're falling below that and you're at 50 and you're giving 25, then that to me is not acceptable. Or I shouldn't say not acceptable, but I think we can do some work there, right? So I think it's normalizing that you're not going to be at 100% all the time, or very rarely will you be there, and that's okay. But it's learning to work with what you have in that moment. So yeah.
Do you find that it's hard to convince youth athletes that skills are important mentally? Or do you think there's a pretty good buy-in?
Mm. Yeah, I think it,
I mean, I guess it's different when you're like
yeah.
introducing them to the topic versus trying to prove to them that it matters.
Yeah, I think that comes through like the level of engagement that they have and like the drive that they have to actually learn about it, like the motivation on their end. Because that's what I was saying. It's like I can teach you all about this stuff and I can tell you it's really important, but until you choose to embrace it, like that to me is the key. And when I think about that, I usually think like when athletes, what I find is that when an athlete goes and takes our content or like our skills out of the session and then, does see a positive effect in their performance, that's the buy-in. And that's hard too, though, because it's not always happening, right? Like I say that too. It's like mental skills they're not a magic wand where it's like, okay, we talked about your self-talk, and then when you go use it, it's going to result in you scoring a goal, right? No. But I think again, it's how you approach that and how you teach it. It's like, no, it's not going to guarantee your success, but what's the alternative? And I think being able to train these things gives you the best opportunity to be successful. So yeah, it's not going to be immediate or maybe, but I don't know. I just think you have to think about it as it's an enhancer and something we should care about that will give you a great opportunity to be successful, but it's not a hey, we wave the magic wand and it's great, right? But I do think like when they do have that experience, which I think they will whenever they do work at it and they're intentional, they will have like a good positive impact. That's when I think they're like, okay, like I can get on board with this. So,
How do you pitch the process of mental skills training to coaches and athletic directors and parents who
mhm.
aren't seeing that direct correlation in
Yeah.
mentality?
Yeah, I think it's the same. Like I think like with ADs and parents and coaches, it's again the idea that it's about holistic athlete development, right? And I don't think it's possible to be at your best without, caring about the mental side of this stuff or the mental side of training. So to me, it's about like, okay, if you're a coach, especially when you're working with youth, it really should be about developing the person as a whole, right? I know that sometimes is, we care about the sports and like the performance and the results, yes. But at the big picture, right, we're trying to develop this kid and prepare them for whatever is next. So I just don't think you can tell me that, mental training isn't going to be a part or shouldn't be a part of that, right? So I kind of just present it as, especially with families, like I said before, it's such a great tool to help your kid have a better sport experience, right? Or better performance outcomes when they work at it. But at the same time, we're talking about developing this kid to prepare them for life. All right. And that to me is always the pitch to an AD or a coach or a parent. And I mean, I don't know, the ones that I work with or that I've talked to, they tend to buy into that and believe in that, right? Like, obviously we have different levels of coaching and like, I think in the youth too, it's hard because, you get people with experience more or less. So I'm not saying it's perfect, right? The buy-in, but I do think that's how I like to present it as, hey, this is holistic athlete development. We got to care about it.
So we do have like 2.5 minutes on
Yeah.
this interview. Let's kind of move into the work that you do with your private practice.
Yeah.
Why found it, and how does that work differ from the sports psych work that you were doing prior?
Yeah, so I started my private practice in I believe March of like 2023. And the reason I did that was I just wanted to have I was at a point where I had done all this schooling and yeah, I was contracted out through IMG Academy, which is great. But I wanted like that just sense of ownership of my own thing, right? And I was at a point where I was like, I think I'm ready to do this. Like I don't I think one thing I needed was IMG and like my those experiences so that I could learn. And you know, yeah, I did go to school forever to do this, but I still felt like I needed more of the applied experience to really feel confident in myself. And I think at that point, when I decided to start my private practice, I was like, okay, I'm ready. And I wanted to just kind of see it wasn't like, oh my God, this is just going to blow up and be like huge. I was just like, I think I want to just see if I can, you know, make a kind of like a name for myself in this stuff. And to have I think in a private practice, it's a little bit different when you're working for an organization versus yourself. It's like for me, I have a lot more like flexibility with just like, you know, how I want to approach this work and how I want to deliver content and, you know, my marketing and everything like that. So I think it was just at a time that I felt ready to kind of jump and see what would happen. And I'm really glad I did because it's been really awesome. And I love what I do. I didn't foresee this for myself. I thought I was going to go into the university setting. Like that was the goal, get my PhD and be a professor. And that totally just was like it shifted completely. And I ended up just focusing solely on being in private practice and working with athletes in an applied setting. So, yeah, it was just like the right timing, I think, for me.
How does the work that you do differ in its applied nature when you're working at a private practice and over Zoom versus working in person at IMG Academy or with a specific team?
hmm Yeah, in person versus Zoom. I think with Zoom, I think it's more of again, there's the pros of it being very convenient, right? But I think the challenge lies in creating engagement. I think it's easier, obviously, to engage people face to face, and in person and be able to make those connections. And like, for example, working in person, it's easier to do activities, and you can do handouts and get creative in that way. But the thing that I'm finding with the Zoom, right, is that you can still do those things. You just have to kind of think outside the box. So I really try to focus, like in my private practice when I'm working with technology, it's like, how can I make this as engaging as possible? And that's like been really interesting because, yeah, I have had to think outside the box where it's like I'm trying to use lots of video. I'm trying to create handouts that I'm sharing on screen. We're doing podcast episodes. We're reading like little bits from articles or quotes. We're Googling athletes. So I think the engagement piece is really important to create. I mean, it's important in both settings, of course. I just think it's easier sometimes to create in an in-person setting.
How do you see engagement differ?
I think it's focus, especially with younger kids. Like focusing on a Zoom versus in person. There's, I mean, when you think about kids, it's like there's different levels of attention. And I find like in person, again, I think it's easier to engage and like maintain focus. Whereas like if you're sitting on a Zoom with a kid, and that's something maybe this sounds really kind of like not a big deal, but I found it like recently or just through this work as important. It's like even the amount of time you're spending on a Zoom with a kid, right? Or with a youth athlete, it's like, okay, I'm losing you after probably around 30, 40 minutes on a Zoom. Whereas like in-person sessions, I'm going an hour, but because it's like pretty engaging, it's easier to kind of, you know, get people to share or ask questions, right? I find like, okay, I have to be aware of like when I'm on Zoom, if we want to really work and get something done, it has to be done within the first 30 minutes. Otherwise, especially with a youth athlete, it's going to just be afterwards. You can tell, right, when people are locked in or not, I think, on a Zoom or when they're looking around or not. It's stuff like that. It's like little things I don't know that I would have thought about before really like get involving myself on like the Zoom side of things with private practice or just with sessions, but that stuff becomes really important. Engagement and maintaining focus and how we do that.
Let me see when your episode is going to go live. I think you have a fair amount of time. Um, you have about a month.
Okay.
So the 31st of March, or yeah, the 31st of March. That's
Hmm.
not a month.
Like 11 days.
Yeah. Um, geez. Yeah,
Okay.
so this episode will come out. I'm Once it comes out, I would love to like reach back out to you. If
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
anything that happens between now and then,
Yeah.
you reach back out, send me a direct message on LinkedIn, and I'll add it to the script. Is there anything that you think that I missed about your experience as a practitioner, your personal experience, your relationship with psychology, etc.?
No, I don't think so. You asked me a lot of good questions, so I appreciate it. That was fun.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you.
I I'm done with my questions. Thank you so
Perfect.
much for just giving such a holistic youth sport experience
Yeah.
perspective. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I don't really think of elite performance from like the groundwork framework perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so like it's really interesting to look at what eventually becomes elite performance
Yeah.
when they're
Yeah.
like 7 years old, 12 years old.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me too, actually. And like that's probably another thing now that you just said that, but it's like especially for families and kids who like that's the dream, right? Or that's the goal, right? To get to that level. Talent is like so hard to predict. And I think that's like where we're running into problems right now with youth sport. Like I said, the professionalization, it's like more is not always better. And even like that idea of specializing in a sport, it's like a lot of parents and families, and I think it's like you have to specialize at a young age in order to get there, right? And I just don't agree with that. I mean, yeah, for some people, yeah, there's like the outliers, right? Like the Tiger Woods and like, but I just think we're like losing the plot. Like it's like we need to focus on the kid, right? And enjoying it and like developing them. But I think sometimes we forget that because we get so tunnel visioned to like, we have to win, we have to get results, we have to be the best. And that's the way to get to the next level. And it's like, I know those things are important. I would never tell a family or athlete that stuff's not important. Yes, you want to win, you want to compete. Yeah, of course. But like, you can't center that as the main focus. Maybe it works out sometimes, but I'd say for the vast majority of time, I don't believe that. So that's something that I think is really interesting right now, like where families are at with like, yeah, just like their decision making towards their kid and their sport experience and at really young ages. So
I mean, I feel like we could talk forever about early sports specialization then. I mean,
yeah,
that comes up so often in the interviews that I do
yeah.
because you really can't predict that talent.
Oh,
So how do you decide when they're 3 years old that you're going to
oh,
put them on skates on the ice and they're going to end up as a hockey player or a figure skater?
yeah. Well, that's the question too, because it's like, well, some of those sports too, it makes it difficult because they're like you don't want to say they have to start early, but like there are those sports like figure skating you just mentioned or gymnastics. It's like okay, starting early is kind of like the norm, right? So that makes it harder to make that decision of like, well, should I specialize or not? So I will say too, I feel for parents because I just think it's hard to know what's right or not with like the specialization, and they're probably also getting pulled in all different directions. I think that comes up too, where I've had kids who tell me like their coaches are telling them, "Hey, you can only play my sport. You're not allowed to do other sports." Right? So that's hard too. I just think there's a lot of different voices and opinions, but like the scientific voice and like the research would tell you it isn't necessary to specialize, right? Like it's not something that we should be promoting. Like there's the developmental model of sport participation. It says like we should start with sampling, then when you get to middle school and high school, you narrow to one or two, and then if you want to, pursue the next thing, it's like you can do that, but it should follow like a progression for development purposes. But I don't know how often we're probably using that type of info for making decisions.
That's why I love when I see videos on social media of like little kids in t-ball who just do not understand baseball
Yeah,
at all and are
just
like
hilarious.
doing cartwheels and like talking to
Yeah,
their
they're having
friends.
fun, which is
Right.
like that's the main thing. I'm like, I don't know, like. aren't we just supposed to have fun? Because I truly know, and I know this is just like like my experience with it, and I know that's not obviously generalizable, but it's like the minute I stopped enjoying running, it was terrible. So, and that wasn't until later, like that was high school, but I can't even imagine for kids who are younger than 12 or even in that age range of like they don't enjoy sports or like they're not having fun because there's so much pressure to perform. Like I don't even know how kids are functioning in that. Like they're probably not, right? So I can only imagine what it's like when I feel that pressure, that weight, to, meet different expectations or standards, or they feel like they have to, always perform well. Like that's a lot for a youth athlete to carry.
Is there anything else that you think that I missed that you'd like to talk about?
I think, no, that's funny that came up, but no, I think we're good. So
Amazing. Thank you so much,
yeah,
Emily.
thank you,
I'll reach
Julia.
back out once this is published. I hope you love
Yeah,
it. Thanks for spending
thank
time
you.
with me
Yep.
today. Have a good
Thank
one.
you. You too. Bye.